A millionaire divorced his pregnant wife with triplets. 3 years later, he saw his children's at a charity. Dear Alcott Stories, sweet family, with my hands on my heart and gratitude in my soul, I welcome each one of you, our loyal supporters and our newest viewers, into this beautiful journey of love, passion, and deeply moving stories. To my dear Alcott Stories family, you have stood by me, supported me, and given me the strength to create stories that touch hearts and bring emotions to life. Without you, I am nothing. Your love, your encouragement, and your unwavering support mean the world to me. Thank you for being my light, my strength, and my inspiration. May God bless each one of you with happiness, love, and endless success. To our new viewers, I open my arms and welcome you into this family. You are not just a viewer. You are now part of a family that believes in love, emotions, and heartwarming stories that stay with you forever. If you enjoy stories that make you laugh, cry, and feel deeply, then this is your home. Please don't forget to subscribe and become a part of this beautiful journey. Together, we will continue to grow, inspire, and share love through the magic of storytelling. With all my heart, thank you. Now sit back, relax, and get ready to dive in. Today's heartwarming story. Zion Carter had always believed that love was a distraction, something that weakened men like him. As the CEO of Carter Enterprises, he lived a life of cold efficiency, where emotions were nothing but liabilities. He had spent years building an empire, one that demanded his full attention, leaving no space for anything else, especially love. Women had come and gone, drawn to his wealth and power, but none had ever touched his soul. That was until he met Amara Brooks. She was nothing like the women in his world. No designer labels, no carefully crafted charm, no hunger for wealth. Instead, she carried an air of quiet resilience. She had nothing to her name except a battered old backpack and a heart full of hope. She was homeless, living in the shadows of a world that barely acknowledged her existence. And yet, she walked with an elegance that defied her circumstances. Her deep brown skin glowed under the golden sun, her curly hair cascading over her shoulders like a crown. But it was her eyes, fierce, unbroken, and full of unspoken stories, that held him captive. It happened on a rainy evening in downtown Manhattan. Zion had just left a high-profile business dinner when he spotted her sitting on a bench beneath a flickering street lamp. She was soaked, her thin clothes clinging to her shivering frame, yet she held her head high. She wasn't begging. She wasn't looking for pity. She was simply existing in a world that had abandoned her. Something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, he felt something other than ruthless ambition. A strange pull, a curiosity he couldn't explain. Without thinking, he approached her, removing his expensive coat and draping it over her shoulders. She flinched at the unexpected kindness. "I don't need charity," she muttered, gripping the fabric as if she would rather freeze than take a handout. Zion smirked. "Good, because I wasn't offering charity, I was offering warmth." Her eyes narrowed, sizing him up. "Rich men don't do things without reason. What do you want?" That response intrigued him. Most people bowed to his wealth, but she challenged him. She saw beyond his tailored suit, beyond the billionaire status. For the first time, someone wasn't impressed by his money. "I want to know your story," he admitted. She hesitated, as if deciding whether he was worth her time. Finally, she sighed. "My name is Amara Brooks, and if you really want to know my story, buy me a coffee, because it's too damn cold to sit here and talk." And just like that, their worlds collided. A love born in two different worlds. Zion never planned to see her again after that night. But something about Amara stayed with him. The way she spoke, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite her struggles. Days later, he found himself searching for her, and when he did, he took her to dinner at one of the finest restaurants in New York. She looked out of place among the wealthy elites in their glittering dresses and sharp suits, but she didn't shrink. She held her own, meeting their judgmental stares with defiance. "You can take me to a 5-star restaurant, Zion, but I'll still prefer a good home-cooked meal," she teased, taking a sip of her water. He chuckled. "You're impossible." "And you're predictable," she countered, smirking. "Tell me, do you always throw money at things you don't understand?" Zion found himself laughing, a rare, genuine laugh. Amara wasn't just beautiful. She was bold, unfiltered, and breathtakingly real. She didn't sugarcoat her words, didn't pretend to be someone she wasn't, and somehow that made him want her even more. Night after night, he found himself drawn to her. They would walk through Central Park talking about life, about dreams, about things that had nothing to do with his billion-dollar empire. Amara spoke of her past, how she had been abandoned as a child, how she had fought to survive, how the world had tried to break her but never succeeded. "You don't belong on the streets," he told her one night, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled sadly. "And yet, here I am." That night, Zion made a decision. He moved Amara into his penthouse, giving her a world she had never known. But what he didn't expect was how much she would change him. She turned his cold, calculated existence into something warm and unpredictable. She made him feel, really feel, for the first time in years, and before he knew it, he was in love. Society's whispers, and a love that defied it all. Not everyone was happy about their love. His business partners, his so-called friends, even the media, all of them judged his choice. They whispered behind his back, questioning why a billionaire would fall for a homeless woman. "She's only with you for your money," they said. "She's beneath you." But Zion didn't care. When he looked at Amara, he didn't see someone who was beneath him. He saw someone who was stronger than him. Someone who had faced more battles than he ever would. One evening, after a particularly rough day of hearing the world's opinions, he found Amara staring at the city skyline from the penthouse balcony. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. She turned to him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. "Regret what?" "Falling for me," he admitted. "Being thrown into this world where people only see me as a billionaire and you as the girl who doesn't belong." She stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. "Zion, I don't care about the money, the status, or the whispers. I care about you. And if you're asking me if I regret loving you, the answer is no." Emotions swelled in his throat. Without thinking, he cupped her face, pressing a soft yet passionate kiss to her lips. She melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as if she belonged there all along. At that moment, Zion knew. This was it. This was the love he never saw coming, but the one he would fight for no matter what. So, despite the whispers, despite the judgment, despite the world trying to tear them apart, he married her. It was a small, intimate wedding, just the two of them under the golden sunset. There were no extravagant venues, no press, no business associates, just them. And for the first time in his life, Zion Carter felt truly rich. This was the perfect love story. But what they didn't know was that love alone wasn't enough. Because soon the cracks would begin to show. Soon Zion's insecurities would creep in. Soon their love would be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. And one fateful decision would change everything. At first, their love was everything. Amara had transformed Zion's cold, lifeless mansion into something warm and filled with laughter. The once silent halls echoed with her soft hums as she made breakfast, her playful giggles when he pulled her close, her soothing voice when she whispered good night. She had turned a house into a home. Zion, a man who had spent years believing that emotions were weaknesses, found himself lost in the comfort of her love. She didn't just love him, she saw him. Beneath the billionaire, beneath the ruthless businessman, beneath the man who had everything except the one thing that mattered most, she saw the boy who had once longed for love, but had never received it. And for a while, it was perfect. But perfection never lasts. The unseen cracks begin to form. Their love was strong, but Zion's world wasn't built for love. It was built on power, wealth, and status. And to the elite circles that surrounded him, Amara didn't belong. No matter how much Zion loved her, his world refused to accept her. The whispers started small, barely noticeable at first. At corporate galas, women in glittering gowns would glance at Amara and smirk behind champagne glasses. "She's so different," they would murmur, their voices laced with disdain. "I wonder how long this will last." His business associates were even crueler. "Zion, you've always been a man of calculated decisions," one of them remarked over dinner. "Marrying a woman like her? That was, unexpected." Zion brushed it off at first, holding Amara's hand tightly under the table, silently promising her that none of it mattered. But as the days passed, the doubts began to settle in. What if they were right? What if Amara needed him more than she loved him? And the worst part, he could never ask her. Because the moment the words left his lips, it would mean he didn't trust her. And if he didn't trust her, what was left of their love? The arguments that left scars. It started with small fights. Nothing serious, nothing dangerous. "Why didn't you tell me you were going out?" Zion asked one night, when Amara returned late from volunteering at a shelter. She frowned, setting down her bag. "I didn't think I had to. It's not like I was doing anything wrong." "That's not the point, Amara," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just need to know where you are." She narrowed her eyes. "Why?" "Because you don't trust me," Zion hesitated. "It's not that. It's just, I don't know. I don't like the idea of you—" "Of me what, Zion?" she interrupted. "Of me having a life outside of you." His silence spoke louder than words. The fights became more frequent. They argued about the most ridiculous things: what she wore, who she spoke to, how she spent her time. One evening, as Amara sat curled up on the couch reading, Zion's voice broke the silence. "You didn't sign the prenup." She looked up, confused. "What?" "The prenup," he repeated, his jaw tight. "You never signed it before we got married." She closed her book, hurt flashing in her eyes. "I didn't sign it because I didn't marry you for your money, Zion." He let out a bitter laugh. "Then why does it feel like everyone around me thinks otherwise?" Her heart twisted. "Do you think otherwise?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, and in that silence she heard everything she needed to know. Amara's breaking heart. No matter how much Amara loved Zion, no matter how much she tried to prove herself, it was never enough. She cooked his favorite meals. She waited up for him late at night, hoping for a gentle kiss, a soft apology. She tried to hold on to the man she fell in love with, but every day he slipped further away, replaced by someone colder, someone more distant. One night, as she sat alone on their massive bed, staring at the empty space beside her, she realized something. She was lonely. How was it possible to feel so alone in a marriage? Tears slipped down her cheeks as she placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the tiny flutter of life within her. She was pregnant, But how could she bring a child into a marriage built on doubt instead of trust? Zion's guilt and the love. He couldn't see Zion wasn't blind to what was happening. He saw the way Amara's eyes lost their sparkle. He noticed how she barely smiled anymore, how she hesitated before speaking, as if afraid he'd twist her words into something ugly. And he hated himself for it. But fear of being used, fear of being betrayed, held him prisoner. He didn't know how to let go of his doubts. He didn't know how to love her without questioning if she deserved it. One evening, he found her in the nursery, staring at an empty crib. She didn't turn around when she spoke. "Zion, I'm pregnant." His heart stopped. "I wanted to tell you earlier," she continued, her voice eerily calm. "But every time I looked at you, all I saw was doubt. And I didn't want my child, our child, to be born into that." Zion took a shaky step forward. "Amara, She held up a hand, cutting him off. "Do you love me, Zion?" The question was simple, but the weight behind it? Crushing. His lips parted, but the words refused to come, not because he didn't love her, God he did, but because he didn't know how to love her right. Amara exhaled, as if she'd been holding on to something for too long. "That's what I thought." And then, for the first time since they met, Amara Brooks, the woman who had fought for everything in her life, the woman who had once walked through fire without flinching, walked away. Zion should have stopped her. He should have run after her, begged her to stay. But he didn't. Because sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes love is about letting go. And that mistake, it would cost him everything. The night Amara told Zion about the pregnancy, she expected joy. She expected his arms to wrap around her, his lips to press against her forehead, his voice to whisper, "We're going to be parents." Instead, she watched something shift in his eyes. He stepped back as if the words had burned him, his jaw clenched, and an unreadable expression darkened his face. "You're pregnant?" His voice was cold, distant, nothing like the man she had married. "Yes," she whispered, heart pounding. "Zion, we're going to have a baby. I thought you'd... Are you sure it's mine?" The world stopped. The walls around her blurred, and for a moment she swore she had misheard him. But the sharp bitterness in his voice, the ice in his stare, told her otherwise. "What?" The word trembled on her lips. Zion crossed his arms, his face void of the warmth he once held for her. "I need to be sure, Amara, because lately it seems like I don't even know the woman I married." Tears pooled in her eyes. "Zion, how could you say that?" His silence was louder than a scream. The man she loved, the man she had given her soul to, was gone. The poison of rumors. It had started subtly, a whispered conversation between his business partners, a hushed laugh at a high-profile event, a casual mention of Amara's past, of the way she had once lived on the streets. "Are you sure she's with you for love, Zion? You've been so distracted lately. Could she be seeing someone else?" He ignored them at first. But when a photo surfaced, a staged, carefully manipulated image of Amara talking to another man, it shattered his trust completely. Zion never confronted her. He never asked. Because deep down, he was already convinced that Amara had betrayed him. That night, he sat in his office staring at the divorce papers on his desk. His hands shook as he signed his name at the bottom. With every stroke of the pen, he killed something precious. The night he destroyed everything. Amara sat on their bed, her hands resting on her growing belly, humming a soft lullaby to the tiny lives inside her. Zion entered the room, his face carved from stone. In his hands were papers. She smiled, expecting him to come closer. Hey, I was just thinking of names for our baby. He didn't answer. Instead, he held out the papers. Her smile faded. What's this? A divorce, he said flatly. Sign it. The words felt like daggers to her chest. Amara let out a shaky laugh, thinking it was some cruel joke. Zion, this isn't funny. His eyes were devoid of emotion. It's not a joke. This marriage is over. She stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Why? What did I do? Zion's jaw tightened. I don't trust you anymore. Her vision blurred with tears. But I love you. Love? He let out a cold laugh. Love doesn't come with secrets and lies. Tears streamed down her face. I never lied to you. Zion, I'm pregnant with your children. How could you do this? For a brief second, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, hesitation, but he buried it just as quickly. I've made up my mind, he said, his voice devoid of warmth. She grabbed his hands, begging. Please don't do this. If you don't love me anymore, at least love them. She placed his hand on her stomach, letting him feel the soft flutter of their unborn children. He pulled away, as if burned. This is for the best, her heart shattered. Amara screamed, cried, pleaded, but Zion Carter had turned to stone. He walked away, leaving her alone, pregnant, heartbroken, and homeless once again. A woman left in ruins. The next morning she woke up to an empty mansion. His things were gone. His presence, once so overpowering, was nothing but a ghost. The servants wouldn't even look at her. A butler approached, placing an envelope on the table. Mr. Carter has requested that you vacate the premises immediately. Amara blinked. What? The divorce is finalized. This house belongs to him. She staggered back, feeling her body tremble. I have nowhere to go. Her voice cracked. The butler looked away, uncomfortable. I'm sorry, ma'am, but Mr. Carter has been clear. Minutes later, she was outside. The doors that once welcomed her with warmth and love were now shut in her face. The cold wind bit at her skin, but nothing was colder than the betrayal in Zion's heart. She placed a protective hand over her belly, whispering to her unborn children, I'll protect you, no matter what. And with that, Amara walked away, not knowing that 3 years later, fate would bring Zion back to her. And this time, he would see the children he had once abandoned. Amara clutched the edges of the hospital bed, her body trembling with pain as another contraction ripped through her. She was alone, no comforting hand to hold, no soothing words of encouragement, just the sharp, sterile lights and the distant beeping of medical machines. The nurse wiped her sweat-covered forehead. You're doing great, Miss Brooks. Just a little more. Tears blurred Amara's vision. Zion should have been here. He should have been holding her, whispering how proud he was. Instead, the man she loved had abandoned her, abandoned them. A sharp cry filled the air. Her first baby, a second later another, and then one more. 3 cries, her heart clenched. Triplets. The doctor smiled warmly. Congratulations, Miss Brooks. 3 beautiful, healthy babies. A sob broke from Amara's lips as she held them for the first time. Zaire, Zayn, and Zara. Their tiny fingers wrapped around hers, unaware of the cruel world waiting outside. She pressed her lips to each of their foreheads, whispering, I will never leave you. I will love you enough for both of us. But as the nurses wheeled her out of the delivery room, reality hit her like a wave. She had nowhere to go. Thrown into the streets. 2 days later, Amara stepped out of the hospital with nothing but a tattered duffel bag, her newborns wrapped in thin blankets. She had no home, no money, no help. She stood outside, staring at the cruel city streets, her body weak, her heart heavy. People walked past her, barely sparing her a glance. "Ma'am, you can't stay here," a hospital security guard said gently. Tears welled in her eyes. Where was she supposed to go? Clutching her babies close to her chest, she walked. She walked until her feet throbbed, until exhaustion threatened to pull her under. Every step reminded her of what she had lost: the warm bed, the kitchen filled with food, the man who had once sworn to protect her. She stopped near an alleyway, looking at an old shelter. It wasn't much, but it was something. Swallowing her pride, she stepped inside. A mother's sacrifice. Life in the shelter was unbearable. The rooms were overcrowded, the food scarce, and the nights freezing. Amara barely ate. Every meal she was given, she fed to her babies instead. She would smile at them, pretending she wasn't hungry, but her stomach burned with emptiness. One night, as the cold seeped into her bones, she curled her body around her children, shielding them from the harsh winter air. Zara whimpered. "Shh, baby," Amara whispered, rubbing her tiny back. "Mommy's here." She buried her face in her daughter's soft curls, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. She had lost everything, but she would never let her children suffer. Fighting for a future days turned into weeks. Amara found small jobs, cleaning diners, washing dishes, scrubbing floors, anything to keep her babies fed. She worked long hours, sometimes until her fingers bled. At night, when she came back to the shelter, exhausted beyond belief, she would hold her babies close and whisper stories to them. "Once upon a time, there was a queen," she'd say softly. "She didn't live in a palace, and she didn't wear a crown, but she was the bravest of them all." Zair's little hand would reach up, touching her cheek. "Like you, Mama." Tears would burn in her eyes, but she would smile. "Yes, baby, just like me." Never speaking ill of their father. Despite everything, Amara never spoke badly about Zion. Her heart still ached for him, but she refused to let bitterness poison her children's hearts. "Where's Daddy?" Zayn asked one evening, looking up at her with innocent eyes. Amara swallowed hard. How was she supposed to explain that their father had abandoned them before they were even born? She stroked his curls and smiled softly. "He's somewhere far away." "But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you." It was a lie, but one she was willing to tell. Because no matter how much she hurt, she wouldn't let her children grow up feeling unwanted. The strength of a mother. Through pain, hunger, and exhaustion, Amara never gave up. She shielded her babies from the cold world, sacrificing everything for them. Some nights she cried herself to sleep. Other nights she stayed awake, praying for a miracle. And somewhere, deep inside, a fire burned, a determination to rise again. Because one day, she knew. Zion Carter would regret ever letting her go. Zion Carter stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, staring at the glittering city lights. From the outside, he had it all: wealth, power, success. But inside, he was drowning in a silence that even the sound of pouring whiskey couldn't fill. The house was cold, lifeless. Amara's laughter no longer echoed through the halls. The scent of her vanilla perfume no longer lingered in their bedroom. The warmth of her presence gone. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening as he took another sip of whiskey. Why couldn't he forget her? He had left her, signed the divorce papers with his own hands. So why did every single night feel like hell? The ghost of her memory. Zion tried to silence the past, but it refused to be buried. He saw Amara everywhere. In the morning, when he drank his black coffee, he remembered how she used to sneak in sugar when he wasn't looking. At meetings, when the world praised his brilliance, he remembered the only person who ever saw his insecurities behind the power. At night, When he closed his eyes, he saw her tears. Her voice haunted him. "Please, Zion, don't do this, don't push me away. I love you. Why isn't that enough?" His grip on the glass tightened, the memory cutting into him like a blade. Why did I let her go? The void. No one could fill. Zion tried to move on, tried to replace her. He surrounded himself with beautiful women, supermodels, socialites, the kind of women who threw themselves at a billionaire. They laughed at his jokes, touched him with practiced affection, called him handsome, powerful, irresistible. But none of them were her. None of them had Amara's fire. None of them could look at him and see the man behind the empire. So, night after night, he pushed them away, drowning in loneliness, drowning in regret. Sleepless nights and unspoken pain. Zion stopped sleeping. The bed felt too empty. Every time he lay down, the last image of Amara flashed in his mind, her tear-streaked face, her shaking hands clutching the divorce papers, the way she looked at him as if he had ripped her heart out. And he had. Damn it! He clenched his fists, guilt crushing him like a weight he couldn't escape. His assistant, Marcus, noticed the changes. "You look like hell, boss," Zion scoffed, running a hand down his face. "Feel like it too." Marcus hesitated. Then, in a voice that cut deeper than Zion expected, he said, "You had something real once, and you threw it away." The words punched Zion in the gut. He didn't reply, because he knew it was true. The regret that would never fade. It had been 3 years since he walked away from Amara. 3 years since he convinced himself that she betrayed him. 3 years since he shattered the one woman who ever loved him unconditionally. And now he was just a man with money, but no love. Power, but no peace. Success, but an empty soul. His heart whispered what he refused to say out loud. "I want her back." But he believed it was too late, because some mistakes could never be forgiven. Zion Carter never cared much for charity events. They were just another stage, another opportunity for the rich to flaunt their generosity while sipping champagne. But tonight, he was here because he had nothing better to do. Dressed in a black tailored suit, he walked through the grand ballroom, ignoring the fake smiles and empty conversations. Women clung to him, desperate for his attention. Investors whispered about business deals, yet Zion felt nothing. His life was a golden cage, and tonight was just another meaningless night. Until he saw them. The little performers that stole his breath. The lights dimmed. The host's voice echoed through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's special performance comes from 3 talented young children. Please welcome Zaire, Zane, and Zara Brooks." Zion's glass froze mid-air. Brooks? The name barely registered before 3 tiny figures stepped onto the stage. 3 little children, 2 boys and a girl, stood under the spotlight. Something inside him shifted. The moment they began to sing, the world around him blurred. Their voices were angelic, soft, yet powerful, but it wasn't their voices that sent chills down his spine. It was their faces, their deep brown skin, their sharp jawlines, the way their small hands clutched the microphone with quiet confidence. Zion's chest tightened, his eyes widened. The little boy on the left, he had Zion's smirk. The one in the middle, his intense gaze. And the little girl, her small, determined expression was a mirror image of his own mother. A slow, unbearable realization sank in. These were his children. The moment, his world stopped. His heart pounded like a war drum. His breath came in shallow gasps. He gripped the edge of his chair, his mind refusing to believe what his eyes were screaming. But then, the little girl stepped forward. With a bright, confident smile, she introduced herself. "Hi, everyone. My name is Zara Brooks, and these are my brothers, Zaire and Zane. We want to thank you for supporting kids like us." Kids like us? Zion's fingers clenched into fists. They weren't just singing for entertainment. They were here because they were poor, because they needed help. A sickening wave of nausea hit him. The triplets he abandoned were here, standing on a charity stage, raising money for children in need, his own children. A father's heartbreak. Zion felt paralyzed. 3 years of emptiness, regret, and guilt came crashing down in one brutal moment. His mind raced. Did they know about him? Had Amara told them? Did they hate him? His hands shook. He had abandoned them before they were even born, and now fate had thrown them right in front of him. He wasn't ready, he wasn't worthy, but none of that mattered, because the moment he saw them, his life was no longer the same. Searching for their mother. As soon as the children left the stage, Zion's heart slammed against his ribs. He had to find them. He shot up from his seat, his movements rushed, desperate. Marcus, his assistant, looked at him in shock. "Boss, where are you going?" Zion didn't answer. He weaved through the crowd, pushing past people, ignoring confused glances. His entire body was on fire. He needed to see them, needed to know the truth, and more than anything, he needed to find Amara, because if his children were here, then she was near, and this time he wasn't going to let her slip away. A man on the edge. Zion Carter had faced ruthless business deals, crushed competitors, and built an empire from nothing. But this moment, it was the first time in his life he felt powerless. His legs carried him forward, but his mind was spinning. His chest was tight, his breath shaky, and his hands trembling. He had spent 3 years trying to bury his regret. Now he was walking straight into it, straight toward them, a mother's strength, and then he saw her, Amara Brooks, standing near the stage, watching over their children with protective, loving eyes. Zion's heart stopped. She wasn't the broken woman he had left behind. She stood, tall, proud, strong. The years had changed her, softened some parts, hardened others. Her skin still glowed like honey under the dim lights, but there was something different, something unbreakable. She had survived, without him. His throat went dry. He had spent 3 years convincing himself that she was the villain, that she had betrayed him. But now, seeing her like this, his heart whispered the truth he had been too much of a coward to face. I was wrong. Eyes that held too much. And then she saw him. Their eyes met, a moment so charged the world faded. Pain, anguish, regret, love, it was all there, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. Zion's lips parted, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? I'm sorry. Forgive me. Would that ever be enough? Her jaw clenched, her eyes darkening, not with hate, but with something worse. Disappointment. Like she had expected nothing from him, like she had already mourned him, like he was just a ghost from her past. Zion felt something crack inside him. The unspoken truth. His gaze flickered to the children standing beside her, Zaire, Zayn, and Zara. His triplets, his blood. The proof of a love he had thrown away. A sharp pain twisted in his chest. They're mine. The realization wasn't just mind-shattering, it was soul-crushing. He had missed it all, their first cries, their first steps, their first words. 3 years of memories that should have been his to cherish. And he had given it all up. For what? For a lie, for pride, for fear. His hands curled into fists. He wanted to go back in time, to undo the biggest mistake of his life, but he couldn't. So now, standing in front of the woman he once vowed to love forever, and the children he had never met, there was only one truth. He had abandoned them before they even took their first breath, and now he had to face the consequences. Zion Carter had faced the world's deadliest businessman, survived the cruelest betrayals, and built an empire worth billions from nothing. Yet, At this moment his feet felt heavier than ever. Every step toward them was a battle against himself, against the guilt, the fear, the regret clawing at his chest. His palms were slick with sweat, his heart hammering so hard he was sure the entire ballroom could hear it. But none of that mattered, because he had seen them, and he had seen her, the woman he had once called his wife, the woman he had thrown away in a fit of blind, unforgivable rage, the mother of his children. Amara, the woman who survived without him. There she stood, near the stage, half hidden behind the curtains, watching over the three little souls standing before the crowd. Zion's breath hitched. She looked different. Not in the way that time had aged her, because she was still the most breathtaking woman he had ever laid eyes on. Her deep brown skin glowed, her figure was still elegant, and those full lips he used to kiss every morning still looked just as soft. But her eyes, they weren't the same. They no longer held the innocence, the vulnerability he once knew. Instead, they were sharp, guarded, unreadable. Zion swallowed the painful lump in his throat. She wasn't the fragile, helpless woman he had left behind. She had survived without him. And judging by the way she held herself, by the way she gently touched her children's shoulders as if to shield them from the world, she'd become stronger because of it. A moment that stopped time. Then, as if she felt his gaze burning into her, Amara looked up, their eyes locked. And in that single moment, Zion felt like the entire world stopped spinning. A storm of emotions hit him all at once. Anguish, regret, love, pain. It was all there, in the way her lips parted slightly in shock, in the way her fingers tightened over the children's shoulders as if to steady herself, in the way her breathing hitched, barely noticeable, but Zion saw it. He saw everything. For years, he had been haunted by the image of her crying, of her begging him to believe in her when he handed her those divorce papers. For years, he had told himself that he had done the right thing, that she had betrayed him, that she had deserved his cruelty. But now, standing here facing the woman he once vowed to protect, but instead destroyed, the truth was suffocating. I was wrong. The children he had never met, his gaze flickered to the children standing beside her, Zaire, Zayn, and Zara. They were small, innocent, perfect, and yet they carried pieces of him. Zaire had his intense, brooding stare. Zayn had his sharp jawline and signature smirk. And Zara had the eyes of his mother. Zion felt his heart shatter into a million pieces. I missed everything. Their first cries, their first steps, their first words. He had abandoned them before they even took their first breath. And now he had to face that reality. A reality he had created with his own selfish hands. The silent accusation. Amara didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her eyes told him everything. You left. You never came back. You didn't even try to find us. Zion wanted to beg for forgiveness, to tell her he had been a fool, that he had spent every night haunted by the sound of her voice in his memories. But what right did he have? He was a stranger to his own children, and to the woman who had once given him her heart. He was just a man who had broken it beyond repair. An unspoken battle. Zion took another step forward, his lips parting, but Amara's eyes hardened. And suddenly he stopped. There was something in her gaze, a silent warning. A wall she had built to keep him out. She didn't trust him, she didn't believe in him, and worst of all, she didn't need him. That realization sent a sharp, unbearable pain through his chest. Because 3 years ago, she had begged him to trust her. And now, even if he begged, she wouldn't trust him ever again. A small hand tugged on Amara's dress. Zara. The little girl looked up at her mother, confused. "Mummy, why is that man looking at us?" Zion felt his throat close. That man. Not daddy, not father. Just a stranger. His heart broke. But before he could say a word, Amara did something that nearly killed him. She bent down, cupped her daughter's little face, and smiled. But it wasn't the warm, soft smile he remembered. It was one filled with quiet strength. "Because, sweetheart," she said gently, "sometimes ghosts from the past don't know when to stay buried." And just like that, she turned away. She took their children's hands and walked away from him, leaving Zion standing there, drowning in the weight of his greatest mistake. Zion stood frozen, watching as Amara disappeared with their children, her back straight, her steps firm. She didn't stumble. She didn't look back. She didn't hesitate. That was what hurt the most, because once upon a time she had clung to him, trusted him with her soul. And now she walked away as if he had never meant anything, because to her he didn't anymore. Zion's fingers clenched into fists, the ache in his chest unbearable, but for the first time in his life he refused to accept defeat. He had destroyed everything. Now he had to fix it, no matter how long it took, no matter how much pain he had to endure. The first attempt at reconciliation. The next day, Zion sent his assistant to find where Amara lived. He expected her to be in some small, hidden place, struggling. But when he saw the simple, cozy home she had built for the children, without him, his heart clenched. She had raised them without his wealth, without his name. And they had thrived. That night, he stood outside her home, heart pounding as he knocked on the door. When it opened, Amara's face remained unreadable. She wasn't shocked to see him. She wasn't angry. She was just cold. "What do you want, Zion?" His name on her lips used to sound like a song. Now it was lifeless. I just want to talk." She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "And I just want to forget you exist." The door slammed shut in his face. A father's desperation rejection burned through Zion like fire, but he didn't leave. He stood outside, staring at the closed door, his jaw tightening. "She hates me, and she has every right to." But he wasn't going to let pride stop him this time, because this wasn't about him. It was about his children. His hands trembled as he knocked again. No response. He knocked harder. Silence, and just when he was about to knock one last time, the door creaked open. But it wasn't Amara. It was Zaire, his son. Zion swallowed the lump in his throat. Up close, the little boy's resemblance to him was unmistakable. Dark eyes, sharp features, a quiet strength in his expression. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Zaire frowned. "Are you the bad man that made Mommy cry?" Zion felt his soul crack. Winning their trust. For days, Zion tried. Amara refused to see him. But the triplets, they were curious. He showed up at their school, at the park where they played, at the small community center where Amara worked. He didn't demand their love. He didn't throw money at them. Instead, he listened. He knelt beside them when they played. He watched their dance performances and laughed at their silly jokes. When they scraped their knees, he was there with a bandage. When Zara had nightmares, he sat outside their house, waiting for Amara to let him in. She never did. But still, he stayed. Because for the first time in his life, Zion understood something deeper than wealth. His children didn't need a rich father. They needed a present father. The gift that didn't matter. One evening, Zion arrived with a brand new, luxurious toy set for the triplets, the kind that made most kids scream with excitement. But Zaire, Zayn, and Zara, they barely glanced at it. Instead, Zara tugged on his sleeve. Can we go to the park instead? Zion blinked. Don't you want to play with the new toys? Zane shook his head. We don't need those, mister. Mister, not Dad, not Daddy. Zion forced a smile, swallowing the pain in his throat. Okay, the park it is. And so he took them, not to a fancy park, not to a private resort, just a simple small park. And there, as he pushed them on the swings, their laughter echoing in the air, Zion realized something. He could never buy back time, but maybe he could still earn their love, one small moment at a time, a mother's guilt and a father's pain. From the distance, Amara watched. She had seen Zion's efforts, had seen the way he showed up, had seen the way their children began to trust him, and yet her heart was torn. She had spent years hating him, years protecting her heart from the man who once shattered it. But watching him now, she couldn't deny the truth. Zion Carter was a lot of things, but he was trying. And that terrified her more than anything, because if he truly wanted to stay, could she let him? Could she trust him again? Or would he destroy them all over again? As she watched him kneel to tie Zara's shoelaces, his fingers gentle, his expression soft, Amara knew one thing. This wasn't just his redemption, it was her battle too, a battle between forgiveness and the fear of being broken again. A heart at war. Amara stood by the window, arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching Zion from a distance. He was sitting in the park with their children, laughing as he helped Zara tie her shoes. He didn't look like the same man who had abandoned her. He didn't look like the cold CEO who had signed those divorce papers without hesitation. But how could she be sure? How could she trust that this wasn't just another phase, that he wouldn't leave again when things got difficult? Her heart pounded with confusion, torn between the past that had scarred her and the present that tempted her. She had spent 3 years training herself to hate him. Yet, every time their eyes met, she felt her carefully built walls cracking, because deep down she had never stopped loving him. And that terrified her more than anything. The unexpected invitation. One evening, as Amara was closing up the small community center where she worked, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. His presence had always been something undeniable. She took a slow breath before speaking. "What do you want, Zion?" A pause, then a soft exhale. "I want to talk." Amara turned to face him, her expression guarded. "Talk about what? How you left me pregnant and homeless, how you ruined my life and now think you can waltz back in and fix it with a few gifts?" Zion flinched, but he didn't walk away. He didn't get angry. Instead, he nodded. "You have every right to hate me," he admitted, his voice raw. "I was a coward. I was blind. I hurt you in ways I can never undo, but I'm not here to ask for a second chance." She frowned. "Then what do you want?" "I want to prove to you that I've changed," he said, stepping closer. "Not just for the kids, but for you, for us." Her breath caught in her throat. "For us." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She opened her mouth to reject him, to push him away, but then she saw the pain in his eyes, the genuine pain, and for the first time in years she hesitated. A night of vulnerability. A week later, Zion did something unexpected. He invited her to dinner, not at some luxurious high-end restaurant, not with private chefs or extravagant meals, just a simple home-cooked dinner at his house. The house she once lived in, the house where her dreams had died. At first, she refused. She didn't want to step back into that place, didn't want to relive the ghosts of the past. But when Zara grabbed her hand, eyes wide with excitement, and said, "Please, Mommy," she couldn't say no. So she went. The moment she walked in, memories flooded her. The laughter they had once shared, the fights that had torn them apart, and now Zion stood there looking at her as if she was the most precious thing in the world. The dance of the past and present dinner was quiet, the air thick with unspoken words. Zion pulled out a chair for her. She hesitated before sitting. Their hands brushed when he passed her the bread. A jolt of electricity. Neither of them spoke about it, but it was there. Undeniable. After the meal, the kids ran off to play, leaving them alone. Amara stood by the large window, gazing at the city lights. Zion walked up behind her, his presence warm, familiar, dangerous. "I miss this," he whispered. She closed her eyes. Don't what? Don't say things that will make me believe in something that's not real." He stepped closer, the scent of his cologne surrounding her. "This is real, Amara," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "What I feel for you, it never left." She turned to face him, her heart hammering. "Feelings don't erase what you did." "I know," he admitted. "But tell me you don't feel this too. Tell me your heart doesn't ache the way mine does." She opened her mouth to say no, but the words refused to come out, because she did feel it. Every glance, every breath between them, every lingering moment. She still loved him. A dangerous weakness. Zion lifted his hand, gently brushing a stray curl from her face. His touch sent a shiver down her spine. "Amara," she swallowed, stepping back. "I can't do this." His jaw tensed. "Why?" "Because loving you almost destroyed me," she whispered. He exhaled slowly, nodding. "I understand." But he didn't stop looking at her with longing, with hope. And for the first time, she was the one who turned away first. That night, as she tucked the kids into bed, she found herself staring at Zion from across the room. He sat in the corner, watching them sleep, a softness in his gaze that she had never seen before. Her heart clenched. Could she really push him away forever? Could she let her children grow up without knowing their father's love? Could she deny the love that still burned in her own heart? She didn't have an answer. Not yet. But she knew one thing. Zion Carter was no longer the man who had destroyed her. The question was she ready to let him fix what he had broken? Or would she walk away before she got hurt again? The mansion was silent. Not the eerie, lifeless silence of emptiness, but a silence thick with emotions, unspoken words, restrained longing, and a storm brewing beneath the surface. Zion sat in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched in front of him. His fingers trembled as he stared at the flickering flames in the fireplace. Tonight was the night. Tonight he would bare his soul. He had spent 3 years living in regret, drowning in guilt, longing for a love he had once so carelessly thrown away. He had tried to earn back his children's love. Now he had to face the hardest battle yet, Amara's heart. The weight of a broken man's heart. Zion found her sitting on the balcony, gazing at the city skyline. She was a vision. The moonlight kissed her deep brown skin, making her glow like a goddess. Her curls danced in the night breeze, and her eyes, though distant, held a softness he hadn't seen in years. But there was also pain he had caused. He swallowed the lump in his throat and stepped closer. "Can we talk?" His voice was hoarse, thick with emotions he could no longer suppress. She stiffened, but didn't move away. Taking it as a silent yes, he sat beside her, leaving just enough space between them for their past to breathe. For a moment neither spoke. The air crackled with tension. Finally Zion took a deep breath. "I need to tell you the truth," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The confession that shattered walls. Amara turned her head slightly, her brows furrowing. The truth? He exhaled, his hands tightening into fists. The truth is, I've never stopped loving you, he confessed, his voice breaking. Not for a second, she scoffed, looking away. Love? She repeated bitterly. You call what you did love? Zion flinched. He deserved that. I was a fool, he admitted. I was insecure. I let my fears control me. I let other people's opinions poison my mind. And I let you go. The worst mistake of my life. Amara's jaw clenched, and he saw her blinking rapidly as if trying to stop herself from crying. You didn't just let me go, Zion, she whispered. You destroyed me. His chest ached. I know, he rasped, and I've hated myself every single day since then. For the first time, tears filled his eyes, not the silent, controlled kind, but the kind that burned, raw, real, and completely uncontainable. I would give up everything, my money, my company, my whole damn life, if it meant undoing the pain I caused you. His voice cracked. But I can't, and that's what kills me. Amara inhaled sharply. She wasn't used to seeing him like this. Zion Carter, the powerful, ruthless CEO, breaking down. For her. The moment shattered when Zion suddenly reached for her hands. His grip was warm, desperate, pleading. She gasped, but didn't pull away. Amara, he whispered, looking deep into her eyes, do you still love me? Silence. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her heart was screaming yes. But her mind reminded her of the nights she had spent crying alone, of the hunger, of the pain, of holding their babies in her arms with no home, no hope, no husband. A tear slipped down her cheek. Zion reached out, gently brushing it away, and that simple touch, so soft, so tender, broke her. A sob tore through her. Before she knew it, she was crying, not just small, quiet tears, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Zion pulled her into his arms, and instead of resisting, she collapsed into him. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel, to grieve the past, to release the pain she had buried deep inside, and Zion held her tightly, his own body trembling. I'm so sorry, he whispered over and over, kissing the top of her head. I love you. I love you. I love you. The battle between love and fear. Minutes passed, but neither moved. Amara clung to his shirt, breathing in his familiar scent. The scent of a love she had lost. A love she wasn't sure she could trust again. Finally, she pulled back slightly, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. I don't know if I can forgive you, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Zion nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her hand. I don't deserve forgiveness, he said, but I'll spend my life proving to you that I'll never hurt you again. Her breath hitched. The sincerity in his eyes, the raw desperation in his voice, it was overwhelming. Could she believe him? Could she let him back in? Was love enough to erase the past? She didn't know the answer, not yet. But one thing was certain. This was far from over, and the next decision she made would determine whether they rekindled their love or lost it forever. Zion Carter had spent years building skyscrapers, sealing billion-dollar deals, and ensuring his empire stood unshaken. But for the first time in his life, money wasn't enough. He could buy the world, but he couldn't buy Amara's trust. She had suffered because of him. She had struggled alone. And no apology, no amount of wealth, no whispered, I love you, could erase that. If he wanted her back, he had to prove himself, not with gifts, not with empty words, but with understanding, with actions that spoke louder than the mistakes of his past. And so, he made a decision, one that would change everything. A place of pain, a place of healing. The old shelter where Amara once lived still stood, hidden in the outskirts of the city. Zion had never been there before. He had always been too blinded by his own privileged world to even consider where she had suffered after he abandoned her. But when he arrived, his chest tightened. The sight gutted him. The shelter was falling apart, faded walls, broken windows, a sagging roof. It was a place of survival, not a home. He imagined Amara here, pregnant, alone, cold. She had once belonged in his mansion, wrapped in silk sheets, living as his wife. Yet here she had been, fighting for her life, and for the lives of their children. A sharp pain stabbed his heart. He had been a monster, and now he would do whatever it took to make it right. The transformation. Amara's haven. Zion wasted no time. He bought the shelter, not to destroy it but to rebuild it. Not as a business deal, but as a gift of redemption. He hired the best architects, the most compassionate caregivers. He poured his heart into every brick, every color, every detail. The shelter became more than just a safe house. It became a sanctuary, bright, warm spaces filled with love, private rooms for struggling mothers, a playground for children because no child should grow up without laughter, a library, a medical wing, a community kitchen, everything Amara had once needed but never had. And at the entrance, engraved in gold letters, was a name that meant everything to him. Amara's haven, because she was the one who deserved to be honored. Sam, a moment or two, the day of the grand reveal, Zion's heart pounded. Would she understand what this meant? Would she see that he finally understood? Or would she think it was just another meaningless display of wealth? As Amara stepped onto the shelter's new grounds, she froze. Her eyes darted around, taking in every inch of the place, the fresh painted walls, the vibrant playground, the children's laughter. And then she saw the sign. Amara's haven. Her breath hitched, her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Tears welled in her eyes. She turned to Zion, her lips trembling. You did this." Her voice cracked, his throat tightened. "Yes," he whispered, "for you, for them, for every mother who has ever felt abandoned, like you did." A single tear slipped down her cheek, and Zion's heart shattered all over again. She staggered forward, pressing a hand to the nameplate as if to confirm it was real. Then she broke. Sobs racked her body as she turned to him, raw, vulnerable, overwhelmed. "Why?" she choked out. "Why now?" Zion swallowed hard. "Because I finally understand," he admitted. "I finally see what you went through, and I hate myself for not being there when you needed me the most." She shook her head, trying to process everything. "I don't need your money, Zion," she whispered. His chest clenched. "I know," he said softly. "That's why this isn't about money. It's about love. It's about you." Her lips quivered. For years she had carried the weight of his betrayal, the pain of his abandonment. But in this moment, she felt seen. She felt understood. And for the first time, she felt like Zion wasn't just trying to win her back. He was trying to be a better man. A heart finally opens. Amara stepped closer. Zion held his breath, afraid she might still walk away, but instead, she reached for his hand. A simple touch, but it sent fire through his veins. She looked up at him, her tear-streaked face full of emotions too deep to name. And then, in a voice so soft yet so powerful, she whispered, Maybe we can start again." His heart nearly stopped. His eyes burned. "Amara." His voice broke. She wasn't saying yes. She wasn't saying, "I forgive you." But she was saying there was hope. Hope that their love, no matter how broken, could still be mended, and that was everything. The evening sky was painted in soft hues of pink and gold, the warm breeze whispering through the trees. Amara stood on the balcony of her small apartment, watching the triplets play in the yard below. Their laughter echoed through the air, filling her heart with warmth. She had everything she needed, her children, her peace, her strength. But tonight, something felt different. A presence, a familiar warmth behind her. She turned, and there he was. Zion stood there, hands in his pockets, his eyes searching hers with a tenderness that made her breath hitch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. But the silence was full of everything they had been through, the pain, the regrets, the love that had never truly died. Then he dropped to one knee, not with a ring, not with diamonds or gold, but with his heart in his hands. "Amara," his voice was raw, filled with emotion. "I lost you once because I let my fears control me. I let my pride ruin the best thing that ever happened to me." Her chest tightened. "I don't deserve you. I don't deserve another chance," he whispered, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I love you. I have always loved you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Her lips parted, her heart pounding against her ribs. "I don't want to marry you for the second time because I have money or because I want to fix my mistakes," he continued. "I want to marry you because I can't imagine my life without you. Because you are my home, Amara. You and our children are the only things that truly matter to me." A tear slid down Amara's cheek. She had dreamed of this moment, she had prayed for it, but she had never expected it to come so beautifully, so genuinely. No grand gestures, no extravagant displays of wealth, just a man on his knees offering her his heart. Again. "Say yes," Zion whispered, "not because it's easy, not because you forgive me completely, but because you still love me." The truth settled deep in her soul. She did. Despite everything, she still loved him, and she always would. With a shaky breath, she smiled through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. Zion let out a shaky laugh, his relief evident. He stood, cupping her face, his forehead pressing against hers. "You won't regret this," he murmured, brushing his lips softly against hers. And for the first time in years, she believed him. A wedding of love, not luxury. Their wedding wasn't grand. It wasn't a billionaire's spectacle. No flashing cameras, no elite guest lists, just family, just love. A small, intimate ceremony in a sunlit garden where vows were spoken, not for the world to hear, but for their own hearts to believe. Amara wore a simple white dress, one that made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Zion wore a classic suit, his eyes never leaving her, filled with adoration. And in the front row, their triplets, Zaire, Zayn, and Zara, dressed in matching outfits, clapping their tiny hands in excitement. When the officiant asked Zion if he took Amara as his wife once again, he didn't hesitate. "I do," he said, his voice firm, full of unwavering love. And when Amara's turn came, she took a deep breath. She looked into the eyes of the man who had once broken her, but also into the eyes of the man who had mended himself just to be worthy of her again. "I do." The moment their lips met, the triplets squealed in delight, running toward them, hugging their parents, laughter, tears, a family finally complete.